So I've now uploaded and published the 1 week later video of the M3 Max MacBook Pro 16. And for the next challenge, I'm going to swap for a whole week to the latest, cheapest version of the M3 standard MacBook Pro 14. It shouldn't be too bad, right? I mean, what could possibly go wrong over the next week? So a solid week of use under my belt, and I've got to tell you, I've learned a lot about this particular MacBook and why I probably wouldn't recommend it to somebody, but we'll get into that as we go. Let's start this part of the video by defining what I've done over the past week to come to the conclusions that we're going to talk about today. 1. All of my web browsing, day work, and normal computer usage has been through this. Additionally, I use this to build the plan, back-end spreadsheets, trackers, graphics, etc. for a brand new Warcraft guild that I'm starting on their Season of Discovery. I've also gone through 2 separate ICC raid nights on my Holy Paladin to test gaming, edited the 1 week later MacBook Pro 16 video for video editing, and I've stared at it really hard for 15 minutes thinking about its design. I'm reflecting right now. Let me briefly mention the specs. It comes with the M3 standard processor, that's 8-core CPU, 10-core GPU, 8GB of unified memory, and a 512GB solid-state drive. The price is $15.99. I'm gonna be honest with you, I did not enjoy the last week. There were some significant limitations that really got on my nerves, but it's not all bad, so let's start off with the positives and we'll get into that negative stuff. Don't you worry, we will get into that negative stuff here soon. First off, it's a MacBook. If you like macOS and you like MacBooks, well, good news, you will feel right at home here. The build quality it's right up there with the rest of the MacBook Pro 14 lineup. It's got a great chassis, the keyboard is great, etc. You've heard me say all of this in every single MacBook video I've made, so I won't bore you or insult you by saying the same thing over again today. The one note I do want to make though is the display. It's great. It's still the best display on the market. And while I'm not a display benchmarker, according to Apple's website, this has the same display found on the higher end models. So you do get that slight increase in standard brightness year over year, which is one of the most important bumps in my opinion in the M3 lineup. Performance wise, I found it to be fine. I mean, nothing remarkable. You can see from some of the benchmarks I've run that it's better than the M1 Max in certain situations and not in others. Multi-core, the M1 Max comes out on top. I mean, that shouldn't be surprising. It has way more performance cores. In single core performance, the M3 does better, but not by a huge margin. It is a balance, much like we saw when the M1 processor first came out. It did much better in single core than everything else, and in multi-core, the CPUs with more cores does better. It's not rocket science. Cinebench R24 doesn't allow the M3 standard to run its GPU test, so you won't see that coverage here. In use, I found it to be fine. The M1 standard though is still fine for like web browsing, etc., so no surprising that the M3 holds up well. In video gaming, it's clearly not as up to the task with its smaller amount of memory, but I found World of Warcraft Classic to be very playable at up to high graphics, and I play that for an embarrassing amount of time each week, so I'm glad that it works out. Video editing has been perfectly smooth in playback, even with some of the rougher codecs that I use, and though rendering doesn't happen as fast as it does on my MacBook Pro 16, it's still perfectly fine for the price of the computer on offer. Performance, I mean, it's okay. It's totally okay. It's not all sunshine and rainbows though. This base model isn't as fire and forget as some of the beefier, more expensive options in the Mac lineup. You do have to be more selective of open tasks if you don't want to have memory pressure problems, i.e., I can't leave all my active programs open at the same time. But if you are careful, much like the cheapest MacBook Air that I've been talking about for 3 years at this point, you can absolutely make it work. I don't think it's as cut and dry as X number of RAM is bad or good. It's more of what performance are you willing to pay for, because any of this stuff can work given careful use. I have heard the fans more here than on my M3 Max MacBook Pro 16, but this does have a smaller chassis, which holds more heat, so it doesn't surprise me that the fans have to work harder. Still, when they kick in, it's not too loud or obnoxious. Do I wish it came with more memory and storage standard? Of course I do, but 512GB isn't the worst, and 8GB of unified memory is usable at the very least. I will actually make a recommendation at the end of this video that gives you both the higher memory count and it doesn't cost anymore. Stay tuned to that. Okay. We all gotta face reality now. Here's where we come to an end of the positives, lukewarm as they might have been. All is not well with this specific chassis, and I can say this specific one because in a first since the initial release of the MacBook Pro 14, we have 2 very distinct and very different body options available. You can differentiate the 2 levels by the spec page, or you can actually find it really easy just from the ordering option, in that the higher end model can be had in space black, where the regular model cannot. If you're looking at silver and space gray options, well, that's not the I guess we could call it good model. Essentially, the lower end MacBook Pro 14 is the MacBook Pro 13 replacement, even if I haven't seen any official cancellation notices. The major difference between the two levels, yes, there's a difference in CPU, there's a difference in memory, but in practicality, it comes down to ports and ports capability. On the premium body, you get 3 USB-C Thunderbolt 4 ports. Those are what all previous MacBook Pro 14s had as standard. The budget-minded model only comes with 2 USB-C ports. You do not get an additional port on the SD card side of the computer. In my opinion, the lower numbers is not that big of a deal. You can set up a whole computer workstation with a single Thunderbolt port. The problem is these budget ports aren't Thunderbolt 4. They are USB 4, Thunderbolt 3. And honestly, the numbering of the ports doesn't matter either because they are more limited than previous Thunderbolt 2 ports from Intel MacBooks. And I'm not exaggerating here. A MacBook Pro 13 from 2015 with Thunderbolt 2 doesn't have the same irritating limitation as this 2023 MacBook Pro 14. The absolute biggest problem with this laptop is it only exports out to a single 6K display at 60 Hz. I know that doesn't sound like a big deal, but team, I am frustrated by this one. I've been talking about this for literal years at this point. We had the M1 and I was irritated that it only did one display. Then the M2 came out and sure, maybe there's just something they can't do with the standard chip, whatever. But I find it unforgivable here. And I don't use that term lightly because there is precedence that has been broken. It's not just the USB-C port. This computer also has an HDMI port to go along with it. You might remember the M1 Mac Mini, hold on. This computer right here. You might remember this because this also has Thunderbolt 3 and an HDMI port. When the M1 only supported a single display, this came to the rescue because this HDMI and Thunderbolt combination allowed you to hook up 2 monitors to the same computer. The MacBook Pro 14 does not do the same. If you plug in a Thunderbolt display and an HDMI display, you only get 1. That means Apple has specifically decided to limit this when previous computers running the same style of architecture could do the same. I find this totally unacceptable. The conversation about base model RAM options and solid state drive speed, that bores me because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter except to folks that need things to complain about on the internet to make a living. Them's the facts. I don't make a living on the internet, and as a product developer myself, I try to really focus on the reason behind things and not just jump at, oh, well, this is X% slower than last year's model. It means it's wholly bad. Well, Gary, you aren't going to recommend this to me, so I have to buy a top-of-the-line computer if I need work done? Is that what you're telling me? No. Actually, you don't, which leads to more of my frustration here. You can actually get, essentially, the same computer with double the RAM and actually the top-of-the-line chassis for the exact same price. On Apple's website today, you could buy a refurbished M2 Pro MacBook Pro 14, and it's the same great computer without gigantic compromises. It will match or exceed the performance, minus ray tracing. It has double the unified memory, and it will still come with the exact same warranty and return policy as a brand new off-the-shelf M3 standard MacBook Pro 14. So to recap my week of only using the cheapest M3 MacBook Pro, I found this to be a totally capable computer that is fine in terms of performance, but it's not fine in capabilities inherent to older models, just intentionally shut off here. I do not recommend that you purchase one, and if you do want a cheaper but capable MacBook Pro 14, I would direct you to that refurbished M2 Pro model. It will just be better in every single way. But what about you? Do you have or are you considering an M3 standard MacBook Pro? Let us know in the comments below. And click here if you want to see a real powerful, real capable machine in action. Click, 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 click. Thanks for watching.